Well, welcome back to the studio and our second week of raw data gathering for the month of December as we close out these last 3 weeks of the year-long study that has been the Energy Sovereignty Project. So let's get right into it. So this brings us up to December 8th where we left off. So as you recall, on December 7th, we had to put the system on zombie apocalypse mode to stop it from that rogue charge. The system had charged to 100%, and then as a way of making at least something of this software debacle that had become Tesla's self-powered mode, I decided to go ahead and see how long the system would be able to run following that 100% charge. And so here we have the 8th. And so what you see here is the opening of our second day, starting the day at 76% with a total PV contribution of 16.1 kilowatt hours of generation and 18.3 kilowatt hours of home use there. And this slight deficit combined with the overall losses from the battery have us ending the day down about 12% from where we ended on the 7th to finish our total solar day at 86%, you can see there. And now I draw your attention to the grid line. So it's not denoted with an asterisk here because I have to admit that I was so put off by the entire software situation in general that I didn't actually even notice that this was going on until I just now when I was getting ready to present this. And so what you'll notice is the system shows that we sent 0.4 kilowatt hours to the grid. Well, I find this interesting since the grid is shut off. So we'll address that as we go through the remainder of this week, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the notes basically only my attempt at joy that we're on our second day of battery power. Woohoo! So the 9th, again on zombie apocalypse mode, starting the day at 66%. Following those overnight losses, we end the day at 80% of system charge after roughly a 2 kilowatt hour deficit for the day. We took in 17.9 kilowatt hours of production and had 19.2 kilowatt hours of home usage. And there is that 0.4 kilowatt hours we apparently sent to the grid while the grid is shut off. But don't worry, when I do the tally at the end of the year, we're going to compare both what Tesla said that I sent to the grid and what our utility said I sent to the grid. We'll be able to kind of compare those to see if these little errors are stacking up to mean anything. And spoiler alert there, they don't. But again, these are cumulative. And so the important thing I suppose to remember here is that we're in our third month of this year, and we're still having that issue where we get those spikes and whatnot. Currently the system's obviously down, and so we'll go ahead and bring you up to date with how the system's going there. But again, it's important to know that these errors, these switching errors, they add up, they stack up, they don't just magically go away. And here we have the notes, and again just that showing the reduction in total 3 days of operation on batteries. And the 10th, starting the day at 58%. The weather isn't doing us any favors here. Due to the overcast conditions, we've got that 10.2 kilowatt hours of production with the home usage of 19.9 kilowatt hours. And so that leaves a daily charge there at total solar day of 63% and 0.3 kilowatt hours to a disconnected grid. And now, while again these are small errors, they stack up here. So all right, and the notes. Day 4 on zombie apocalypse mode, and we predict tomorrow we'll start the day with around 43% there, as you see in the notes. And also I make mention that this would have been the last day that the system would have been able to provide power to the home if it was doing so just on battery power alone with no solar. And so that information might be interesting to folks as they look at this data to try and figure out, well, in the case of a PV system failure, how long could I potentially last on on the system, that kind of a thing. So, and we have the 11th. And again, starting the day at 42%, nearly exactly what I predicted the previous day. Again, that usage overnight is pretty constant. And the contribution from solar today was even worse than yesterday. As you can see there, ended the day basically where we started. And so that reflects that the rate of input from solar during the day was pretty much what was consumed by the home during that same period. And so instead of actually gaining any freeboard to use in the evening, that was basically it. So the raw numbers, as you see here, 7.1 kilowatt hours from the PV generation, with a daily home usage for this 24-hour period staying pretty consistent for this time of year at 18.4 kilowatt hours and 0.2 kilowatt hours to the grid when it was shut off. And the notes, just that, nothing to report really other than the noted issue that the system's running normally. And the 12th, starting the day at 22%, and obviously here, if we don't get some good solar input, we're in for a bit of trouble. And we didn't, and we are. And so with the cloudy contribution that we've got today, we got 12 kilowatt hours of production and 17.8 kilowatt hours of home usage. And so we're ending the day again, just like yesterday, basically where we left off at 26%. And so if we don't turn off zombie apocalypse mode now, we run the risk of running out of power by morning, or at the very least, you know, kind of having almost nothing left, 6% or something like that. And the notes. And so that's basically that. Just another day of normal running. And I wound up taking the system off of zombie apocalypse mode, as you can see here, on the 13th. And again, as you can see, I put the system back on grid power, and no sooner did I put it on grid power than we had a rogue charge. And so here's the graph for the 13th. So I had to get to the studio to get some work done. So I let the system charge long enough that I felt it would wind up getting me through the day there, and then once I got back in the evening, I could mess with it to try and get it to stop doing its rogue charge. So as you can see here, the total solar day, bring this up here. The total solar day represents the gain by that rogue charge there. And so by the end of total solar day, when the sun went down, irrespective of everything else that the PV gave us, we were at 25%, and raw numbers there, you can see that the contribution for the day is only 4.3 kilowatt hours because of that heavy rainy weather. And then the home usage, again, pretty typical, right in that range there. We wound up with 22 kilowatt hours of home usage for that. And the notes, and again, showing what I said earlier about having to come back in the evening to try and manipulate the system. And so using that same method that we went over before about setting the system to 100%, then to 0, and then setting it to something other than 0 after that. That tended to work in the past, and as you can see by the graph, it did again, and the system was now more or less back on its normal operation. So I don't know what to say about that other than what I just did. So we have the 14th. Asterisks all over the place here again. So starting with the start and total solar day percentages, these are the result of setting the system reserve at 10%, and so this caused the system to put all the power from the solar back into the battery while the home ran from grid power. But now, that said, this explains the 2.4 kilowatt hours taken from, but it does not explain in any way the power that was going to the grid. So simply put, here the system's lost its mind. At 2 points during the day, the solar contribution to the system was simultaneously charging the batteries and sending power to the grid. So that's a condition that should never exist. And so here is the graph of that nonsense. Okay, this is a little busy here. Just let you look at that for just a second before I strip away the solar contribution. Okay, and so now we'll strip away the solar contribution so that you can more clearly see what was going on here. So again, why in the hell am I seeing two periods of nearly half an hour each where I'm sending precious solar to the damn grid while I'm on self-powered mode and the batteries aren't full? By this point, the system was above its 10% reserve as well, and so there's just no reason that I can see for this modality. If I'm missing something here, do please chime in the comment section and let me know what that might be, but just seemed to be very odd. And so here are the notes, just what I said, and I'll add it in here because the system ended the day at 18% and we were connected to grid power. I set the system back to a 0 reserve at the end of the day because we were expecting sunny weather over the next few days, and so I wanted just to go ahead and let the system run and see if it was able to recover. But it was also pretty obvious that there was a good chance at 18%, right? Because it's right around that 20% amount that we generally lose overnight. Right? So I didn't think it was going to make it to morning anyway. But I set it to 0, and since the system was still attached to the grid, let's see. And on the 15th. As you see, we didn't quite make it until morning. We started at 0% charge after having to draw about 3 kilowatt hours from the grid by the time that solar began to contribute. And we had a good day of production there as expected, 22.3 kilowatt hours with a home usage of 20.9 kilowatt hours. So we were able to see a slight gain, ending the day at 19%. And again, meaning gain with losses and everything else. So, but would that be enough to make it till tomorrow on the 19th? Well, you just have to stay tuned because the 18th was our final day here of this week. We have the notes here, and we will leave by noting the final anomaly for the week. As you saw, we drew that 3 kilowatt hours from the grid. Well, that was largely due to another rogue charge that we took. But this one was a little bit strange. And here is the graph of it. So as you can see here, it seems to have been triggered by the start of solar contribution. We mentioned in a previous video where one of the things that it looks like causes those transitional spikes are if you have a cloudy day where the solar is switching on and off, or if you have a rapid onset home load, sometimes that'll do it. Or in the case here, where we started talking about as solar starts to contribute in the morning, you get this flickering on and off that occurs as the system hits that 0.1 kilowatt hour threshold where it will either produce or not produce. And so those ticks seemed like those were what triggered this event. But now the interesting thing here is, as you can see that here you said that about an hour or so before the contribution, you start seeing that we ran out of battery, and so then you get that little ticking. But what you see here that's interesting about this rogue charge is not only did it solve itself, I didn't actually intervene in this one, but it was only 8 kilowatts or so. The remainder up to that 9.1 is probably legitimate home loads, that kind of a thing. As you can see, if you look at the bottom spike there, I think I caught it all. If you look at the bottom spike there, it looks like it's somewhere in that 7 or 8, maybe 8 and change range that it had charged on there. But it was brief, and so for whatever reason, once solar started to contribute to the home, the system actually was able to recover, and with no intervention on my part, the rogue charge stopped. So that's about it. So I hope you found this week interesting, and so I'll get to our 2 final installments of this relatively quickly, and then we can start looking at the real juicy stuff, this the culmination of all of this raw data as we present some of the results. And so that's coming probably in 2 or 3 days. We'll start doing that after we close out the last couple of weeks of December. And so with that, I wish you the best of luck with your own systems. Thanks for joining us here as we close out these final weeks of raw data, and we'll see you soon.